Are you going through a season that's challenging your faith? Do you feel like your joy is not what it used to be? Did you return to your faith after wandering away and feel like the enemy's attacks are stronger than ever? Do you want to hear from God and discern the lies from the truth? And more importantly, do you want to strengthen your relationship with God? Sister, I'm here to encourage you and help you in your journey back to Jesus, back to your first love. I want to help you reignite your faith again so that you can have renewed joy. Let's do this together, sister. Welcome back to week 3 on this July series on the book of Job. And in the context, talking about suffering and really studying the life of Job. And today we're actually going to focus on Job's friends and something really special that they actually did. A lot of times, I think Job's friends get sort of a bad reputation of, the arguments back and forth. And we're going to address that as well because that's important for next week. But today we want to look at the initial reaction and actions of Job's friends and how and why that is so significant and what a good example of what they did can be for us when they first encounter Job in his suffering. So I want to reintroduce my amazing husband, Fernando Alejandro. This is his 3rd week with us. He has his master's in theological studies from Gordon Conwell Seminary, and he is currently in his final semester and getting his 1-year theology degree, THM degree, which is meant to prepare him for his doctorate. So I'm really happy to have him with us. Not only is he an amazing student, an amazing person, someone who actually also teaches in our church and preaches sometimes, and we co-lead a group together, a family group, a community group together, and with some amazing people. We serve with so much delight in our church, but also he's just an amazing man. I nothing, not for nothing, baby, but you're amazing. I love you. He's right next to me, and I love doing this because we don't get an opportunity to talk on the podcast very much. So I'm really happy that we've been doing this. And I hope that you've been enjoying the last couple of weeks of our study of the book of Job. All right, Fernando, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, here we go. So let's start with we're going to look into Job chapter 2 and specifically on the part of Job's friends. So let's go ahead and get started.
All right. Well, thank you for that incredible introduction. I hope I can live up to those accolades. But yeah, I'm excited to jump into this. So Job chapter 2, we're going to be introduced to Job's 3 friends here. And I'm going to read the verses from verse 11 to 13 in Job chapter 2. And it reads, When Job's 3 friends, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, heard about all the troubles that had come upon him, they set out from their homes and met together by agreement to go and sympathize with him and comfort him. When they saw him from a distance, they could hardly recognize him. They began to weep aloud, and they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads. Then they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights. No one said a word to him because they saw how great his suffering was. Now, you mentioned in your introduction that Job's 3 friends, they get a bad rap, and certainly that's earned. They spend the vast majority of this book here arguing with Job, and their main contention with Job is that, well, he must have sinned in some terrible way to be receiving this punishment from God. And Job is basically arguing that he's innocent in all of this, but they don't believe him. And they're trying to get him to see it, and you can tell that there's sincerity there. They want him to see it so that he can repent. Like you see some of these exchanges, and they're just like, look, like God's gracious if you just repent, like he'll restore your fortunes. And Job's like, but I didn't do anything to merit this sort of response. And so when especially thinking about this from the perspective, and I think this lesson, we have to approach it from a pastoral perspective. We're thinking about the importance of ministering to those who are in deep grief, loss, and despair, people who are suffering. At the end of the day, when we think about these three friends, what we see in these verses, what is it that they do? They gather together, they strike an agreement to go and sympathize and comfort Job, right? That is a hugely important part of just their friendship as three men organizing themselves to say, guys, let's go be with Job right now. He needs us. Let's get the guys together and let's go comfort him. And we don't really know how far off they had to travel, but they certainly did come out and showed up for him. And it's striking that when they showed up, um, you know, they see him and they're so taken aback by his appearance. They hardly recognize him. And as a result of that, they spend the first 7 days and 7 nights in absolute silence. No one says a word to him because they saw how great his suffering was.
Yeah.
One of the things that they do right here is just that, to just sit in grief with him, to just mourn alongside him. I think this is such an important aspect of dealing with suffering, is that sometimes we feel like we have to have all the answers. And so we can come and be like, if I just give them the right spin, then that's going to take them out of their grief. That's going to take them out of their despair. Um, but really, with a loss so fresh as what Job has experienced, the most important thing really is just showing up and being there present, mourning alongside the individual. And so that's how it starts. The first 7 days, 7 nights, I think these three friends do an incredible job of being present with Job and mourning alongside him. And then when Job starts to express his despair, express his his just wrestlings with God, that's where the three friends get into trouble. Is that they start responding to Job and they feel this need to really have the answers. They feel this need, and this is something we were talking about it earlier. You know, what they feel is going on is that Job is misrepresenting God, that Job is saying false things about God. And I think they're responding from a place of like zeal for God to look at, like kind of defend God's honor. But at the end of the day, they were wrong. They didn't know what what the real picture was, and they didn't realize that Job was actually speaking truthfully.
And you make a good point, because and even if they were right, right, like because oftentimes we if just speaking as someone who's trying to be a good friend, right, especially in some with somebody who's going through a difficult time or grieving or suffering, whether they're saying something like that doesn't make sense or not, like whether they're doing that or not, like sometimes we want to speak and we want to, I think, maybe say the right thing or defend something. And in reality, maybe what that person needs at the moment is just for you just to stay there. And I think they did that. And I love that they did that. And I believe they did it for several days with him and stood and stayed there with him and grieved with him and sympathized with him. So it wasn't a small thing that they did. They did something really, really good. And so I will want to credit them. And I think that perhaps, and this is just me, and if I were in this situation of in this kind of suffering, I think that I wouldn't want my friends to argue with me. I think I just want them to comfort me. Not to say that if I said something crazy, they're not going to correct it, but I would say how to approach it is kind of tricky, right? Because how do you approach these conversations with someone who's a friend and you're trying to love them, but you're also trying to, I guess say what is correct or say what is right, but and it may hurt, it may offend the person, it may, it's that question of, I mean, we're no psychologists, right? But it's kind of makes you think about that, like what's the right thing to say, and I feel like, and this is just me, I think sometimes we just need to take a step back. I know for me, is just pray, right? And this is something, I know we're encouraged throughout the scriptures just to pray even for that friend. Pray before we meet with the friend. Pray that the Spirit will guide, because sometimes, we might say the wrong thing, and that may not be what God wants us to say, right? So I just think about this. I think about this approach, and I think what I love is what they first did. And I know later they get kind of argumentative with him, but I want to so much give that credit to what they first did. They did it together. They were clearly all friends. I love that, because what that shows is that this is an example for us to make sure we have that friendship around us, that community, those friends that will be there for us. But not only that, that you, my sister, me, Fernando, that all of us be that friend. That it's not just about receiving, that we are that friend to that person or to someone else, and that we're able to love them through these painful times. So
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And as you mentioned, like them showing up for those first 7 days and 7 nights and sitting in silence with Job was some of the most compassionate responses that they give to him. And so I think that's really important to point out. I would say in addition to that though, is that as Job speaks, you see that they feel the need to kind of defend and respond. And you see it in their responses, right? The first time Eliphaz speaks, he's like, who can keep from speaking? Like hearing what you're saying, Job, like who can keep us from speaking? I have to say something is kind of what he's getting at. Bildad in Job chapter 8, when he first responds, he kind of goes on the offensive. He tells Job, like, your words are a blustering wind. Like, he's going on the offensive against what Job's saying. Zophar, he's like, will no one rebuke you when you mock? Right. So like obviously they feel like there's certain lines being crossed that they need to respond to in this. And I thought about this because right when someone is deeply hurting, they turn their anger towards God. And then they might be saying some things about God. And this is the God who saved me. This is the God that I love. And you're saying these crazy things about God. Like, how can I sit here silent? Um, and so that is a great question is like, what do we do in these instances? And I think at least part of the key is understanding where it's all coming from, right? This is born out of despair. When people are in this space, their language and what they're saying, what they're expressing is born in grief. It's born in loss. It's born in suffering. It's the language of suffering. And we know that Jesus came to bear our sufferings. And so I think one of the key aspects of this, and we'll get into this a bit more in the next lesson, but one of the key aspects of this is focusing on speaking what's true about God in these instances. So instead of going on the defensive and being like, you need to be rebuked, right? Like Bildad at one point, he's like, look, Job, just be sensible and then we can talk. He says that in chapter 18, verse 2. And it's like, be sensible. He just lost his children. He just lost all his wealth. He's broken out in boils. Like he's not in the greatest emotional space to have this deep theological conversation, but it's where he's at. I get it. Like he's speaking and so they feel the need to respond to him. But I think it's actually Job who kind of gives the solution here. In chapter 16, beginning in verse 1, it says, then Job replied, I have heard many things like these. You are miserable comforters, all of you. Not not what you want to hear when you showed up to go, comfort your friend. In verse 3, will your long-winded speeches never end? What ails you that you keep on arguing? I also could speak like you if you were in my place. I could make fine speeches against you and shake my head at you. But my mouth would encourage you. Comfort from my lips would bring you relief. So, Job, who is according to God, remember, go back, if you haven't listened to the first two lessons, go back and listen to those, and you'll read it in Job chapter 1. God is the one who's saying, like, this is the most upright guy on earth, right? Like this is the most righteous man in the land of the east. This is God's representative here. Um, and so, what is he telling us as that righteous man? What he would do if the roles were reversed? He's saying, look, I would show up to encourage, I would show up to comfort. And that's what you guys would be receiving from me if the roles were reversed. Um, and I think that that's a really key aspect of engaging in these sorts of circumstances is that there may be things that people are saying, the despair, the language of despair is going to be used, and instead of responding to these statements in that moment, to instead take a step back and seek to encourage, to speak what's true about God, to bring comfort, to bring encouragement. And ultimately, it is the lack of truth, right? When Job's friends are judged at the end, God says about them, they have not spoken truthfully about me.
Wow. Wow. Thank you for that. So, in all of this, Fernando, would you just tell us, like, what do you think in this particular as in these particular verses when we're looking at, all these things that you pointed out about his friends and, what do you think God is trying to teach us here? Like, I know that we can get so much from this, but what would you say, or what's a question perhaps that you can leave us with in light of these scriptures that you've read? Maybe something to reflect on, a question that you can maybe help us ask ourselves, so that we can be a better friend.
Well, I think to answer that question, I want to share something that Job says that I think is important here. In Job chapter 21, verse 1, it says, Then Job replied, Listen carefully to my words. Let this be the consolation you give me. Bear with me while I speak, and after I have spoken, mock on. Right? So Job's being a little salty here. And he says in verse 4, Is my complaint directed to a human being? Why should I not be impatient? Now, something that's important to notice is that what Job's saying here is that, look, I'm not arguing against you, right? My complaint is between me and God. So that changes the perspective of things. So the friends there, they're reacting to him like they need to defend, like it's their task to defend God or to defend. I think to some extent they're defending their beliefs or defending their own arguments, and that's why they're engaging so much. Job had asked previously, "What ails you?" right? What ails you that you guys are like arguing with me in this way? And I think that that's something to notice is that sometimes the way that the friends reacted here, the way that they went into an argumentative mode, the way that they were trying to defend, it's something internal. It's more like a pride almost that resides within us, that we're trying to defend something that we don't really need to be defending. Instead, to kind of notice, okay, I'm here to serve a particular purpose that God Himself would want me to serve. Like God came in the form of Jesus Christ, who bore sufferings, who can give that comfort, who can relate to our sufferings, who can relate to our losses, who can relate to our grief. And what does He come to provide? He comes to provide that comfort and to come provide that relief in the midst of suffering. He wants the church to be that in this world. And so I think in a very real way, if we're able to take a step back and just say, okay, um, we as God's church, the body of Christ here on earth, if we can enter into these spaces and realize that it's not that they're attacking me, that they're accusing me, but they're angry with God, let me mediate within this situation to provide some comfort. Let me just try to provide some truth, that can give something that can show love and compassion in this set of circumstances. How can we help someone see God more clearly in this time of suffering? That's really the question here, because we can't solve it, right? Like when someone's going through suffering, obviously if we can take away the suffering, do it. Like if there's a circumstance that you can easily act to relieve it, obviously we would do that. But if it's something where someone's experiencing a loss, for example, they just have to go through that grief. I think the importance is to just help them to see that they're not alone, that God is present, that God has overcome death itself, that God ultimately loves, that God is compassionate, and he expressed all of that in the person of Jesus Christ. And if we look at Jesus's ministry, we see consistently the love, the care, and the compassion expressed over and over again in a whole variety of circumstances. And if we can just point people to that love, point people to that compassion, that is more important than trying to argue every theological point.
Wow, that is so true. I love this last question that you're leaving us with. How can we help someone see God more clearly in this time of suffering? And I think a lot of that is our actions will speak more, right? How do we love them? How we're just there with them. Do they feel loved by us? Do they feel like they're not alone, like they can count on us? We may not be able to resolve, everything, right? But, or maybe even anything, but do they feel love? Do they see Jesus' love in us and how we love them? And I love that so much because I feel like if I were Job, it's funny because when you were saying that verse there, where what he would have, if he was them, he would not be doing this. He would do the opposite. He would actually, like you said in verse 5 of Job 18, right? Is that correct? 18 or 16? 16. And verse 5 you said, "But my mouth would encourage you." So if I were you, right, I would encourage you and I would comfort you. My lips, comfort would come from my lips. And I was like, yes, Job, that's exactly what I'd be telling my friends. Like, hello, like I need encouragement right now. I don't need this like arguing back and forth. So yeah, this is a great lesson in friendships and how to be a good friend, and it's particularly in a time of suffering. And so I hope that this was an encouragement to all of you, my beautiful sisters, and of course, if there's brothers listening, thanks for listening, my brothers. Thank you so much for joining us again, Fernando, my amazing husband, for this time to talk about friendships through suffering and what kind of friend we should be really to through the time of suffering of our friends or family members, people we love and care for, and how do we show that? Well, how do we reflect Jesus' love to that friend, to that person? Okay, so that is it for today. We will pick it up next week, where we're going to get into lies and truths. We're going to be talking about, we're going to go into a little bit more on of these arguments that have happened. And so Fernando will give us better insight into that next week. I'm really excited about that. My sister, if you received my monthly love letter, aka newsletter, you know that this was coming, right? Because I gave it to you every single month, where you get a preview of what we're talking about next month. And if you're not signed up for my love letter, what are you waiting for, my sister? Sign up. Just go to theintentionalchristianwoman.com, go to free resources. You're just going to go ahead and get a few free gifts from me, and also be signed up for the monthly newsletter. I send it pretty much on the first of every month. So I pray that this episode blessed you. And my sister, I will see you in the next episode, or we will see you in the next episode. Sister, I truly pray that this episode has blessed you and has encouraged your heart today. If it did, would you share it with a friend? Also, would you leave me a review? Not only do I love reading my reviews, the reviews actually help the show be found by others who could use the encouragement. And if you want more resources that could help your walk with God, simply visit theintentionalchristianwoman.com. You'll find all kinds of goodness in there. Sister, know that I love you and I am praying for you, and I will see you in the next episode.